4 years after he was defeated by President Joe Biden, former President Donald Trump has made a historic political comeback. The president-elect defeated Vice President Kamala Harris to become the 47th president of the United States. This is a look at the national map. Trump recapturing the White House after early wins in the battleground states of North Carolina, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. Michigan went red earlier today, and he's also leading in Arizona.
Trump's win gives him the presidency, of course, the election also flipping the Senate. The House could very well be next. Last night, Donald Trump told supporters that America has given him and his MAGA movement a mandate.
I will not let you down. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before.
Vice President Harris called President-elect Trump to concede the race. A senior aide tells us she discussed the importance of a peaceful transfer of power and Trump being a president for all Americans. She also spoke to supporters a short time ago at her alma mater, Howard University in Washington.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. The fight for freedom, for opportunity, for fairness, and the dignity of all people.
And so, as we mentioned, we're also watching the balance of power change on Capitol Hill. Republicans have won the majority in the Senate. Control of the House remains up for grabs.
Let's start with CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns and CBS News campaign reporter Nidia Cavazos. Caitlin, it has been a whirlwind days, weeks, months, hours for you. Tell us, from what your own analysis tells you, what you're hearing from operatives, how did Trump pull this off?
Hey, Lindsay, great to be with you. It has been a whirlwind. As you know, we've been traveling with the former president as he's been crisscrossing these battleground states, especially in those final hours, making every last push that he could to turn out the vote. And what's really striking, Lindsay, at talking to campaign operatives, is that they see a fulfillment of a strategy that they had employed long ago, which was to target low propensity voters. They made a big gamble, a risk, targeting voters who didn't show up in 2020 and hadn't really participated in this political process before. And to reach them, this is about 11%, the campaign estimated, in these battleground states, to reach them in unconventional ways. Remember how many podcasts he did, how many times he sat down with YouTube stars and other kind of social media stars, really trying to tap into an electorate that hadn't been galvanized to participate in politics. And as you look at the exit polls, that has paid off, particularly among young men. He's also expanded his support among Latino voters, especially among Latino men. This was a goal of the campaign, one they say was implemented in part by a sophisticated ground game strategy and a data collection effort that was allowed them to find and target these voters and make sure they turned out. So the former president is now the president-elect, having expanded his base of support in ways that the Republican Party had been hoping to for the past several years. And it's notable, too, that this is a candidate who not only went through a criminal trial, is going to be the first president with a federal conviction, but he also survived 2 assassination attempts and has transformed the Republican Party in his image. And so he is going to Washington with what he calls a mandate, not only given to him, in his view, by an electoral college win, but also he's on track for a narrow win in the popular vote and an expanded Republican majority in the Senate. And as you mentioned, we're keeping an eye on the House as well.
And Nidia, I want to get your reporting and your take on something that Harris had to say about the future of the country in her speech. Let's take a listen for our audience.
The light of America's promise will always burn bright. As long as we never give up and as long as we keep fighting.
Nidia, it seemed like so much of Vice President Harris's remarks were focused on the future, moving forward, that this is not the end of the fight. How do you think she went about or is going about explaining her loss last night?
Well, this soundbite that we just heard from Vice President Harris, it pretty much summarizes her message here that despite the fact that the outcome of this election wasn't favorable, it's not what the crowd wanted. She did reassure them that everything will be okay. But her message was also that telling them and urging them that they must fight. And this is similar to the message that we heard from the campaign chair earlier today, Jen O'Malley Dillon, as she was addressing her staff. She was saying that this is just the beginning of the fight for them in addressing the impacts of the Trump presidency. So she urges the campaign chair as well as Harris to keep on fighting. This is her message to the crowd that was filled with volunteers, campaign staffers, and a lot of supporters as well from Howard University.
Caitlin, what do we know right now about what the Trump team is actively doing? Do we have any information on a transition team?
Well, the transition has begun. The transition team is meeting. They are a few miles away. The former president has been at his resort in Mar-a-Lago. He's also been talking to world leaders. He had a 25-minute phone call earlier today with Emmanuel Macron, of course, the French president. Topic of conversation, according to a readout from the French president, was that they focused obviously on their relationship before, but of course, Europe and the future of Ukraine is at center stage here. Remember, this is a candidate in Donald Trump who was very opposed to sending further U.S. military assistance to the region. He is also working with the transition team. That team includes his two sons, Don Jr. and Eric Trump. They are playing a big role. J.D. Vance, his vice presidential nominee, now the vice president-elect, is also serving on that transition team, along with Linda McMahon, who's the former CEO of WWE Wrestling, and she also had served in his cabinet before, and Howard Lutnick, who is the former CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, a close friend of the former president, has been traveling with him also in recent days. But what I'm watching is how they build out this government, not only those thousands of positions in the government, but especially his cabinet, because remember, that center stage of this campaign was the criticisms that he had received from those who had served with him in office, his former chief of staff, others who had served in high-level cabinet positions, questioning his fitness for office. That was something that the Harris campaign had seized on, and Donald Trump has said before that he will pick people differently. So we'll be watching to see as he's making all those phone calls.
Caitlin Huey-Burns and Nidia Cavazos, thank you both so much for being part of our coverage. We appreciate it. Let's now bring in CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa. And Bob, I know you spoke with the now president-elect's team and Donald Trump himself on Tuesday afternoon. Of course, the campaign is going to project confidence at that hour. But do you think the campaign expected this level of success?
Great to be with you, Doug and Lindsay. This is a campaign that's driven by the candidate, and that can sound like an obvious point, but it's really important to understand as we move forward covering the Trump transition and the Trump White House, a return to power, that this is someone who's at the center of his entire operation. This is not some kind of tiered system with many different stakeholders. It's Trump as the conductor trying to pull all of these different people together into a political movement in a coalition that he has control over. And that's what we're watching at this hour. Who is he allowing now into the inner circle? Caitlin Huey-Burns mentioned Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and that is true, based on my reporting as well. RFK Jr. will have a seat at the table. So will Elon Musk, one of the world's richest men. And we're looking for a potential expanded circle for Trump at this point. One thing that's always true of Trump is as long as someone is willing to pledge loyalty to him and show that they're willing to be someone serving him while he's president or candidate, he's willing to listen. And so this is going to be an unpredictable moment as he staffs this administration and thinks through his policy agenda.
Bob, what does the Trump campaign attribute to its better-than-expected performance among some demographics, including Latino voters and black men?
There's a belief inside the Trump campaign that by talking about cultural issues from a conservative perspective, they were able to make inroads with voters of color, white voters across the country, those who attend religious services regularly, because they believe that many people who are maybe on the fence politically and are working people across this country feel like they are outsiders in American political life, outsiders in the American economy, and outsiders in their own state. And Trump is offering not just grievance against the political and legal and cultural establishment, but he's offering them a policy playbook that speaks in a populist way to the concerns of working people. And economic pain is something we have covered at CBS News consistently throughout this campaign. And it's a real motivating factor. If people are feeling economic pain in their life, they're looking for someone to step in and say, I'm going to be a weapon against the system that is failing you. And even though Trump has character questions, conduct questions on so many fronts, a criminal conviction, many voters were willing to overlook that because he offered, once again, as he did in 2016 in particular, this outsider as an alternative.
And Bob, so much of your reporting over the course of the last 8 years has gone towards the question, will this change Donald Trump? Will he appear different? Will his vibe shift? In 2016, obviously, as soon as he started speaking in his remarks at the inauguration, you got a sense of where he was. Do you think that this win in the sort of landslide that we're seeing take shape will change the President Trump 2.0 that we're about to see?
In brief, Doug, no. I can think back to going to meet Donald Trump when he was then Mr. Trump, the businessman at Trump Tower, more than a decade ago in 2010, 2011, 2012, when I was starting out my reporting career. And he was someone who, to this day, has remained this figure who is constantly changing, willing to adapt, ride the wave of news, as he once put it to me, instead of trying to just go in a traditional way along with the news cycle, to think in unconventional ways about making his way in business and politics and in the culture. And he is going to continue to bring those instincts to the presidency. This is someone who had a rally that was incendiary to many Americans at Madison Square Garden, but he believes it brought attention to him in his campaign. This is someone who made his bones in Hollywood by being the star of a reality TV show, someone who is a frequent guest at professional wrestling matches.
Robert Costa, thank you.